Okay, I think we're alright. I believe the only issue I've got left is my monitor isn't working, so I'm just going to take it on faith that you guys can hear me. So, let's go ahead and switch over here. Oh, and now my... Oh, lordy. Okay, it's just going to be one of those days, I think. So, I'll just take it on faith. Alright, sounds like we got some confirmation, so we should have um, audio, and we should have BGM, so I think we're alright. Camera cut out there, so Windows updates. What are you going to do, right? Well, let's go ahead and get started. We left off last time after the battle in the Stone Talons, and the Conclave forces were knocked back. Oh, there's my monitor. I don't even know with OBS. It just does what it feels like. Um, anyway, we left off last time after the battle finished, and we saw the nice resolution scenes there. Um, and then following that, they went off to go further on, and they fought the big damn worm, and the breadcrumbs were laid, or more breadcrumbs were found for the mysterious link between the planets and the two worlds and groups of people. So we'll probably find out more of that as we go on, or it may be setting the stage for further installments. Who's to tell? We've still got half a book left, but there's nothing that says that everything needs to wrap up in one book, right? So let's go ahead and jump right back into it on this lovely Tuesday night with Chapter 15 of Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Oh my, that's ambitious. Well, good luck. Alright, Chapter 15. Whenever we thought we understood the Ravagers, they surprised us yet again. Drawson and his scout Calder stood at the front entrance to their colony and patiently waited for the arrival of the Forerunner. He knew that the negotiations with his father would be tense, and he was confident that presenting a united front would be the best course of action. His father was a resolute leader of their people, but he could also be rash and short-sighted when it came to outsiders. "Do you think you'll agree to your plan?" Calder asked from his right side. She had arrived less than an hour before, and Drawson insisted she wait for their allies before reporting in. Word of their arrival would have reached Rays by now, and he imagined the pack leader was growing more impatient by the minute. He must. If Darkos is ready to make full-scale invasions, then none of us are safe, and we must stand together, Drawson replied, his eyes fixed forward, watching the diminutive form of the ship approach. In the back of his mind, he was full of worry and doubt. Despite his father's flaws, deep down he loved his people, and Drawson hoped they would be able to appeal to that. The ship landed with a large gust of wind, and the duo reflexively shielded themselves from the dust. The hatch opened, and Drawson smiled broadly, seeing Angel, Lark, and Aughran descend the ramp. Calder slipped away to inform the guards of their arrival, and Drawson walked forward to clasp arms with his friend. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "How could I not? You and Beldaz managed to form a truce while I was busy. The last I can do is follow through to help make it happen," Lark asserted. Drawson turned to Aughran and extended his hand in the traditional greeting Beldaz had taught him. "I want to thank you for coming as well, Captain. I know this all must be strange and difficult for you." Aughran shook his hand firmly. "Strange and difficult is part of our mission statement, my friend." Drawson turned to face Angel, who had hung back behind Lark's shoulder. He studied them momentarily and noticed the familiarity in which they stood so close together. Feeling pleased for his allies, he addressed her directly. "I am glad that you are part of the proceedings as well. After your assistance at the Stone Talons, I hope you can provide insights to help sway my father." Angel stood a bit straighter and held her chin high. "I'll do my best to help." "Let's be off then. The sooner we talk to my father, the sooner we can start to make plans. He then turned and led them down into the colony. The colony had been established in a large natural wasteland. The firm soil was ideal for digging underground tunnels, and the harsh environment meant many valuable resources were left untouched for them to harness. They had lived mostly isolated for decades, but Darien had come some years before to discuss an alliance between the races. Despite rejecting the idea, he had formed a fast friendship with the pack leader. Reyes had even sent a letter offering his condolences when Lark's parents died. The path down was somewhat steep, but glowing gems embedded in the walls lit their way. At the bottom, a pair of large iron doors stood open before them. On the other side, a group of 4 guards saluted Drawson and stared curiously at the others. Drawson led them down a massive tunnel that curved and split off into branches. Down there, we have our gardens and livestock. He pointed to the first offshoot from the main tunnel. We grow different varieties of fungus and subterranean vegetables, and the Keenock we raise for food. Keenock, Angel repeated. A small, fat omnivore, much like your pigs, Lark clarified. Angel paused at the end of the path and held her pad close to her chest. We'll go see one later, Lark reassured, and her eyes lit up with excitement. Further down, Drawson pointed to another exit. That way is a massive underground lake. That's where we get our water and hunt the crustaceans the treekin and the seakin are so fond of. Seakin? Akron glanced at Lark in confusion. So sorry, Lark explained. Seakin is an old name for my people. Soon, they reached another large opening. An angel peered in and saw that it was a honeycomb of tunnels and alcoves. Small groups of children tore after each other in their bestial forms while howling with laughter. Your little ones sound happy, she commented. Drawson glanced over and smiled at the observation. We take the utmost care of our offspring. They stay together for education and play until they are of age for the choosing. Choosing? Is that how they decide their place in the pack? Angel motioned to the vast tunnels around them. Yes, they choose their gender, their adult name, and decide if they wish to stay in the colony or to go out and live in the other parts of Durance, Drawson answered. Gender? Angel's eyes widened, then focused back on the young Ravagers. They don't have one now? It's part of their biology, Lark explained. Until they reach adulthood, they have no gender, so they use the years before to think and plan for what gender they want to be. He motioned to Drawson. He spent most of his childhood planning to be female. Drawson snorted at that. I did. However, when I spent time with my father, saw him guiding our pack, and went on missions with him, I realized my life had a different calling than I originally thought. Is this the only place your people live? It doesn't seem like much room. Akron observed as he caught up with the others. We don't need as much room as the sprawling cities you see elsewhere, Drawson replied, but we do have other tunnels. This one merely houses the extended family of the pack leader. All the other tunnels are interconnected with their own farms, living spaces, and barracks. We are a people nearly 2,000 strong. His voice was filled with pride. Incredible, Akron observed. You would never know from the outside. It just looks like barren wastes. Which is exactly the idea, Captain. If the Conclave came after us, they would have to navigate long mazes of tunnels, and with my people setting up ambushes, traps, and secret fallback locations, they would have difficulty finding us, all before their invasion was wiped out. Drawson halted before a second set of doors. These were twice the size of the previous set, and made of gold. A single pair of Ravagers guarded them. Each stood at 2.5 meters, and their bronze scales shone in the crystal's light. A pair of twisted horns rose from their forehead and crooked back. They looked as though they could easily gore a passerby with a single shake of their massive heads. I'm ready to give my report to the pack leader, Drawson declared. Without a sound, the two turned in unison, opened the doors for them, and bowed their heads deferentially as the group passed. Drawson took a step, but hesitated suddenly, before turning to the trio. Let me do the talking first. I don't want to bring up an alliance with the Stonekin until I can give him a full update on what the Conclave is doing, he warned. Without hesitation, the three of them agreed, and the group took a bracing breath before they entered the chamber. Angel almost froze in her tracks, but Lark's reassuring hand on her lower back propelled her forward. The chamber was nearly the size of Talon Keep. The hewn sandstone walls were plain, except for an enormous inset mural on the right-hand wall. As the group proceeded into the room, she noticed that the mural depicted the Ravagers' escape from the Conclave, and the most striking part was a sword that the leading Ravager carried as they stormed from Lifesever. The massive dais was at the farthest end of the chamber, with a smaller one on its left side. 5 guards stood at each one and held their weapons loosely. The smaller dais held a fine throne made of wrought gold and plush white cushions. A beautiful Ravager female wearing a gossamer blue gown sat pensively. Angel recalled that this was Fenara, Drossen's mother. Fenara's face was unreadable as she surveyed the newcomers, but Angel saw the way her protective hand never left her rounded belly. The other throne was obsidian and pewter. It had horn-like spires that reached up to the ceiling. Above the throne was a strange sight. One half of a massive sword was mounted to the wall, and Angel recognized it as the one from the mural. It was well over a meter long, with a white crystalline body and leather grip. Her attention was quickly stolen from the sword when her eyes landed on the largest Ravager she had seen yet. Even as he sat, she could tell he was almost 3 meters tall and was covered in scars from years of battle. His single red eye was locked on them, and his deep breathing could be heard in the otherwise silent chamber. Angel turned to Lark to see if he would provide any information, but the expression on his face showed that this was his first time here as well. Drossen walked to the middle of the chamber and knelt before the black throne. "Pack leader, I bring greetings and dire warnings of traitor!" Reyes rose and snarled, the low sound sending vibrations through the chamber, and the thick layer of dust danced across the stones. Drossen kept his head bowed, a conflux of emotions racing through his mind. Just as he was about to speak again, his father roared with a resounding voice of nightmares, "Traitor!" Reyes turned and wrested the sword from the wall, the spikes on his throne cutting into his forearm. He merely grunted in irritation at the wound and threw the weapon at his son with all his strength. The flat of the blade struck Drossen and nearly knocked him over before it bounced off him to clatter to a stop several feet away. He raised a clawed hand and pointed to Drossen accusingly. "You conspire with our enemies, assist them in battle, and have the nerve to come to me with some pathetic idea of an alliance?" His scarlet eye blazed with rage. Drossen stood with a look of panic on his face. "Who told you? The group was under my command, and they were ordered to let me give the report." Despite his fervor, his shouts were no match for his father's booming voice. "You have been gone too long, whelp. You have forgotten that all Ravagers belong to me." Reyes beat his chest with both fists, causing the guards to grip their weapons tighter, and Fenara to flinch. "Who spoke is irrelevant. What matters is that you have betrayed our people. I would kill you now if you weren't my son, but spending your life digging tunnels will have to suffice." His hateful gaze turned to Akron and the others. "Who are these creatures you taint our home with?" Angel unconsciously took a step back, and Lark moved in front of her, providing a barrier against the furious pack leader. She glanced at Akron, who had his hand hovering above the handle of his weapon, his eyes filled with the same fear as Drossen and the others. Drossen was stunned into silence. He knew his father was short-tempered, but this was far beyond his usual mercurial moods. Something had happened in the weeks he was gone. Determined to have some control of this conversation, he bared his teeth and loudly declared, "The Defiler and his friends are honored guests. They came here in peace to try to help us." "More lies, more traitors, more enemies," Reyes muttered and shook his head. Suddenly, he snapped his gaze to the Forerunner crew and snarled, as though seeing them for the first time. "Unlike you, they don't have the luxury of being protected. They will be detained at once." His command rang out as he gestured to the guards on his left. They advanced toward the crew, but Drossen intervened, physically blocking them from walking forward. "What has happened to you, father? Darien was your friend. You fought together. Now you would imprison his child, a hero who has fought the Conclave?" Drossen bellowed, his scaled hands clenched so hard his claws bit into his palms, and blood trickled down his fingers. "I would have killed that worm if the Conclave hadn't done the job for me," Reyes replied with a dark grin. Lark stormed to the center of the room and stood beside his ally. "I don't know what caused this paranoia, Reyes, but your impulsive hatred will just aid Darkos in destroying your people." Reyes stared at Lark blankly, his entire body still as a statue. Then, without warning, the power of the pack leader burst forth as he shifted to his bestial form and charged. He was nearly as big as a strider, and his ebony-scaled hide gleamed in the light. Rearing back, he went for Lark's throat and swiped. At the last second, Lark dodged and threw his sword. As he reeled, trying to get his bearings, he felt a distinct sting on his neck. Wetness trickled down his throat as a cut just in front of his jugular opened up. It was a near miss. The guard stood before Drawson as they watched silently, unable to act. Awkward lifted his weapon and nearly fired, but Angel grabbed his arm and jerked it down in time. He glanced over her head at the combatants in confusion before snapping his eyes to her. "We can't just let him die," he hissed. "They have rules," she insisted, refusing to remove her grip as she recited her studies on the Ravagers. "They don't allow interference in a challenge to the pack leader. If we try to do anything, the guards will have to kill us as well." Awkward almost argued further, but balked when he saw the tears streaming down her cheeks. It dawned on him how close they had become, and how the crisis was probably even harder on her. With a resigned nod, he put his weapon away. Rays pressed the assault on his smaller opponent, but his size proved to be a hindrance, as he often bit or slashed an area where Lark had been moments before. Meanwhile, Lark repeatedly called out that he didn't want to fight him, and he refused to kill an ally. As time dragged on, and the frightening dance continued, Rays began to look as though he were tiring. His movements were slower, and his breath was becoming heavier. Just when it seemed that Rays might be losing a battle with fatigue, the giant Ravager shook his head to regain focus and whirled around. His thick tail caught Lark's legs and swept him up. Lark's back slammed into the stone ground, and the entire room could hear the choked gasp of breath leaving his body. His elbow came down just as hard, and he lost his grip on his weapon as blinding pain shot up his arm. With his opponent down and unarmed, Rays leaped onto Lark, caging his head and arm down with his wicked claws. Lark's fingertips barely grazed the sword grip, and when he scrambled to grab it, the blade retreated farther away. Mind reeling with the need to survive, he changed his tactics. He scooped up a handful of dust and threw it in Rays' eyes. A pained screech tore from the pack leader's throat, and he reared back, staggering and coming to a stop on Lark's sword. Once his eyes were clear, he bared his fangs and stomped hard, shattering the sword like pottery. Despite his injuries, the young man rolled to his feet and darted away from the furious Ravager, holding his hands up in a defensive gesture. "Stop!" Fenara cried out, standing from her throne. "Mother, don't!" Drawson demanded in his attempt to quell her. She ignored the warning and glared at Rays. "This young man has saved many of our people's lives. You can't just murder him. Your anger has gone too far, husband." Rays gaped at her in shock, and just when it looked as though she might have gotten through to him, a growl came forth that chilled the spectators to their bones. Drops of saliva dripped to the ground from parted fangs, and he threw back his head back and raged. "I am surrounded by traitors!" With a powerful leap, he coiled his legs and hurtled towards his accuser. Fenara's silver eyes widened as the looming specter of her mate's claws and fangs bore down on her and their unborn child. She closed her eyes and braced herself for the impact, but it never came. A loud screech pierced her ears, and she glanced up to see sparks fly as Lark wedged the white crystalline blade between her mate's razor-sharp claws. She blinked in surprise and stared at where the treasure had been mere moments ago, speechless at the unnatural speed he had used to defend her. Lark groaned from the effort it took to keep a hold of the great blade. The half-hilt bit into his palm, but he refused to yield. Rays snarled and angled more of his immense weight onto the sword to either break it or wrest it away. Something inside Lark's shoulder began to tear, and he bit back a scream. Inspired by the agonizing pain, he did the only thing he could think of. He channeled essence magic through the weapon to heal himself and hopefully distract his foe. The weapon flared to life and glowed brightly. Rays recoiled with a guttural howl of agony and collapsed onto his back, writhing as weeping sores opened across his thick hide. The stench of rot filled the large chamber, and Lark's expression shifted from horror to anger. Rays righted himself, and a black, congealed fluid splattered from his festering wounds. He roared again, weaker this time, but still intent on murder. "Why are you hurt by essence magic, Rays?" Lark demanded, molten fury pouring through his veins. The crazed monster didn't respond, too far gone for words at that point. It barreled down on Lark, but this time he was better prepared. As soon as the beast got within range, he surged essence magic again, and parried an oncoming blow. The clawed limb was severed and burst in a haze of charred, decayed flesh before it could hit the ground. "Why are you hurt by essence magic, Rays?" he repeated, already knowing the answer. Any sense of holding back for the sake of an ally was gone, and now he saw nothing more than another being twisted by entropy magic. Everyone in the chamber watched the macabre dance in complete silence. The Ravagers were overwhelmed by the reality that their pack leader, the strongest of their kind, had somehow succumbed to entropy magic. The creature that was formerly their beacon and protector staggered and lunged again, collapsing to the ground. Logic and thought were lost entirely to hatred and a desperate need to kill. It gurgled purulent blood and snarled as it attempted to bite at Lark's legs. In one nimble move, Lark stepped aside and buried the blade deep into the former pack leader's skull. It twitched and flailed uselessly against the blade, pinning it to the floor. As its body scrambled to escape, the bones and sinew of the neck tore, and blood sprayed in all directions. The head continued to gurgle and hiss as it attempted to bite at Lark, who stared with disgust at the once proud Ravager. Closing his eyes, he gripped the white sword and evoked his magic again. A scream, unlike anything anyone had heard before, erupted from the former pack leader. The sound carried on as the fetid flesh was consumed by essence magic, and began to burn and curl like a paper in a flame. With a snap, the jawbone broke, and the head lolled to the side, still growling and fighting for the chance to kill. The sounds did not stop until the bones had turned to nothing. The flesh became ash, and the echoes remained bouncing off the cavernous walls for long after. The only sound that punctuated the silence was Lark's heavy breathing, and as soon as the head was completely gone, the guard nearest Fenara turned to Drossen and requested in a tremulous voice, "Pack leader, what now?" Drossen tore his eyes away from the remains of what used to be his father as he snapped back to reality with the realization of his new position. He strode purposefully across the chamber to where Lark sat and hoisted him to a standing position. He held Lark's hand up high with his own and proudly addressed the chamber. "The Defiler has risked his life to save the Pack Mother and the unborn life of my sibling," he spoke loudly, ensuring that he had the attention of each person in the room. "My father's lies are gone, along with his horrific form." He stared down at what was left of Raze's body and faltered. "I don't understand. We're supposed to be immune to their magic. How did the Conclave do this?" He turned to Lark, eyes pleading for a solution. Lark slowly extracted his hand and lowered his arm to his side. "I have no answers for you, Drossen. Only that everything we've seen here is more proof that we can't wait any longer to unite and stop them." "Then we won't wait." Drossen turned away from his father's remains and approached the large throne. As he took the new seat and position, he looked over to his mother, who gave him a proud smile, despite the tears in her eyes. Lark was practically tackled by Angel, giving him a fierce hug and nuzzling her face against his neck. "Are you okay?" she whispered, intense relief flooding her voice. "I'll be fine. As soon as we're done here with some rest and healing, I'll be good as new," Lark reassured as he kissed her temple. Akron cleared his throat, drawing the duo's attention to the new pack leader, who was again addressing the chamber. "I want messages sent out to every corner of our colony," Drossen called out. "The Conclave has murdered my father, and so our response will be swift and terrible." Each guard faced him and knelt in reverence. "Our hostilities with the Stonekin have ended," he continued. "They have proven to be honorable friends, and will be our allies in the fight against Darkos." Lark lifted his gaze and held the sword out across his hands. "You should have this back, then." Drossen held up his hand to decline. "No. Our half of the Archblade should stay with you. You can use its abilities far greater than I can, and we will need you to use it in the coming battle." He insisted and motioned for Lark to lower the weapon. Lark was shocked by the refusal, but too exhausted to argue further. Drossen continued to talk to the guards and his mother about what needed to be done. Akron gave Lark a gentle pat on the shoulder that had borne the weight of Raze's attacks, and the young man winced in pain. "Let's get back to the ship," Akron directed, and they enthusiastically agreed. "He said the thing!" Lark held Angel's hand as they entered the medical bay. Maya looked up from her microscope and froze at the sight of Lark covered in blood. Why is it that everywhere we go you end up bleeding? Maya asked incredulously as she pointed to an open bed in vexation. Most of it isn't mine, Lark declared as he sat down and tried to wave away her irked expression. I came for a shoulder wound. No big deal. With a huff, Maya began to scan his entire body. Let's see. Torn rotator cuff, sprained wrist, bruised collarbone. At this point, for you, this truly is no big deal. Angel chuckled and stroked her fingers through his hair. He really can have a flair for the dramatic. Lark turned and blinked in confusion at her statement. What is that supposed to mean? Well, you deliberately cut your hand in Sosaria, and then you dove off the ship to join the battle at the Stone Talons, she recounted, folding her arms. He opened his mouth a few times, as though thinking of a valid argument, but ultimately could not, and he hung his head in resignation. Giggling softly, Angel gave him a small kiss on the cheek, and the young warrior practically blushed in return. Maya smiled as she watched the exchange and began to run the regeneration device over his body. Her brow furrowed when she saw the purple, swollen mass that had become his shoulder. What happened? Reyes was corrupted by entropy magic. He was insane. He attacked me, and then he turned on his mate. When I realized what he was, I had to destroy him. His voice shook, but still obviously haunted by the events. Maya seemed shocked at the news, but didn't stop her work. But I thought that was impossible. All accounts I heard said they were nearly impervious to magic, entropy magic included. Everyone there had the same question. Angel answered instead. They're in a panic, trying to figure out how it happened, and searching to find any more victims. It's almost as if they found a way to infect him without magic, he muttered. Maya stopped and recoiled, causing the others to turn towards her with concern. Before they could ask what was wrong, she cried out, I think that's exactly what happened. Lark and Angel exchanged confused looks as Maya rushed to her desk. She picked up a pad and nearly fumbled it in her rush to return. I've been studying the disease that the treekin are infected with, she began with a mixture of desperation and excitement in her voice. Have you found a cure? Angel asked, resting her hand on Lark's. Almost. I think I'm close. But what might be just as important is that I am certain now that the Conclave created it. Maya responded, handing the pad to Angel. She took it and began to read over the information on it. Lark glanced over with a lost expression and exclaimed, But that's impossible! They use entropy magic to create their infections and plagues. They have for centuries. That might have been the case before, but they seem to be doing something new. I studied the infection that Reynard had when you first came aboard. With that, I was able to identify clear markers that the Conclave uses for developing their biological weapons. Maya explained as she resumed his treatment. I found the same markers in the blood samples of the blight victims from Sosaria. So, the blight is a non-magical bioweapon, Angel summarized, the distress evident in her voice. She set the pad down, shaking her head, which means it can't be treated with essence magic, and it also explains how the Conclave found a way to corrupt the Ravager's pack leader. Lark took a long, deep breath as the words sank in before he pleaded. Maya, you must find a way to help them. You said before you developed some kind of treatment for the crew if they were affected again. Can you make something similar for Drawson and his people? Maya gave him a reassuring pat on his hand. Akron should be on the bridge by now. I'll tell him to delay our departure to give me time to come up with sample treatments and help show them how to make more. She handed the medical tool to Angel. You finish treating him, and don't let him leave until his shoulder is the right shade of pink, she ordered and dashed out of the room. Lark laid his head back and sighed. Yet another reason to be grateful your people came here. What do you mean? Angel asked as she fired on the device and started to treat his wounds again. Without your technology, we would have never discovered this new plot to spread their infections. And without your help, I don't know how the battle at the Stone Talons would have gone. He chuckled bitterly. Makes my being ousted from the Archblades completely worth it. I meant to ask you about that. The weapon you used in the throne chamber. Drawson said it was half of the Archblade. What does that mean? She finished his treatment and sat down on the bed across from him. The Archblade was an ancient weapon wielded by Darkos when our people first recorded their history, he replied as he pulled his tunic back on. What happened to the other half? And how did the Ravagers get it? As the story goes, the sword split in two when he first used it against his own people. One half became tainted with entropy magic, so Darkos continued to wield it and called it Soul Rend. The other half took on properties of essence magic, and as such, no one in the Conclave could use it. It was kept hidden at Lifesever until the Ravagers escaped and took it with them. It was instrumental to their success, so they called it the Rebel's Heart and kept it as a trophy. Lark watched Angel intently as he spoke, and she slid off the bed and moved to stand in front of him. And so, your people named your elite force after the original weapon? She finished and came to a stop at his knees. That's right. We honor the memory of the weapon that once helped our united people, and name ourselves after it as an oath of guardianship, he explained. Do you still consider yourself an Archblade, even after what happened? Her eyes never left his, and he watched for signs as she was pushing too far. Lark nodded solemnly. I always will. I took an oath in the presence of my parents, my king, my people. I protect everyone from the Conclave, and I will not stop until Darkos is dead. Recognition from the Council means nothing to me. Angel drew him into a long kiss, running a hand along his jawline. I really admire your determination, she remarked quietly, resting her head against his. Lark carefully grasped her hands. He thought over the events of the past weeks, and how he kept being impressed by her mind and moved by her kindness. Those thoughts turned to their uncertain future, and the one thing he was undeniably certain of. He slid his arms around her waist, nuzzled her throat, and quietly spoke a confession. I love you. Angel leaped away as though burned, nearly trampling his feet as she retreated. She stared at him with wide eyes as the weight of his words hit home. Her mind was flooded with intense emotions. She tried to push past them and not let her thoughts overtake her, but this time it was impossible. Are you all right? Did I say something wrong? Lark frowned, and his hand lifted as though to touch her, but she stepped away again. No, I didn't expect that, she stammered as her heart pounded in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. I'm sorry, I need to go. She ducked her head and bolted from the room as fast as possible. As Lark watched her flee, he fought the intense urge to follow her and beg her to stay. He rubbed his face in his palms and laid back on the bed with a loud groan. Somehow, he still managed to drive her away, and this time, he didn't know how to fix it. Angel leaned against the door of her room and slid down until her head was on her knees. Wrapping her arms around her legs, she took several deep breaths as she tried to calm her thundering heart. Once, she had thought she was in love, but it ended badly. Her partner often demeaned her and made her feel worthless, to the point she actually believed him. It took her a long time to finally muster up the courage to walk away, and she was terrified of being trapped like that again. Lark seemed so completely different, and that bothered her the most. He wasn't a pattern she could predict or fit in a tidy box. Questions raced through her mind without pause. What would happen when they eventually left the planet? Would he want to come with them? Would he ask her to stay with him? Would she stay with him if he did? What if they were all killed by the Conclave, and it didn't matter? She could admit to herself that she was already developing strong feelings for him, but she wasn't ready to say it out loud and make it real yet. Tears pricked her eyes, and she wiped them away with her sleeve. She felt shame for leaving the room so abruptly, twinned with a hot bolt of anger that she was the one again succumbing to her overwhelming anxiety. She was always so meticulous in every detail, but was at a loss for how she could have prepared for this. When her mind finally settled, she pushed herself up to stand. She shook her head and resolved to deal with this properly in the morning. Then, she tried to go about her evening routine as though things were normal. A book she had been reading was left open on her desk, but she couldn't read more than a few sentences before she lost track of the plot and had to start over. Exasperated, she lay in bed and tried to get any semblance of sleep she could. That brings us to the end of chapter 16. So there's definitely been some developments. The twist there with Reyes and the unexpected welcome that the crew found from the Ravagers was quickly turned to a darker side, as it found that the leader of the Ravagers had been twisted without anyone even knowing, without anyone even imagining it was possible. And then we had the name drop, of course. The I don't know, do we call it Chekhov's sword? We're a little late. We're a little late for that because we saw the other half before when we were reading from Darkos's perspective a few chapters back. But now we've seen both sides, so we've got the benefit of the reader's viewpoint. So yeah, we'll see. For those of you listening, I do need to give a little bit of insight here. At the start of each chapter, and at some of the breaks in the chapters, there are, in fact, swords, one white and one black, kind of framing the chapter numbers or sitting parallel to each other between the lines of text. So I've got the benefit of having that little extra bit of insight and not like knowing that something was going to be coming along these lines for quite some time. But it's nice to have it out in the open now and in the story that there's the two halves of the sword that both have been seen and both are accounted for. And then the big drop from Lark, dropping the big 3 words. And Angel was definitely not prepared. His timing could probably be a little bit better. A lot better. But spontaneity, right? I will say I'm not too familiar with being trapped in anxiety like that, so I can appreciate how difficult it can be to write it. They always say you write what you know, and so when you're trying to write something that you don't have first-hand experience with, it can really be a challenge. So you having your wife to help and give you that insight, the other side, it can really be a lot of help. Okay. Now, quick question, guys. I'm not sure whether my page turn sound effect is going off. I'm gonna fire it off a couple times. Do you guys hear this? Okay. So it's just my monitor. That I can troubleshoot that later on my own time. So as long as it's working, we go for what little immersion we can get around here. So let's go ahead and continue in. We've got chapter 16 ahead of us. Adura is intelligent, relentless, and unstable, making him one of the most dangerous beings on Durance. It was well into the night, and in the midst of a third round of pacing, reading, and failing to sleep, Lark made his way to the bridge. Peeking through the door, he hoped Lauren was still at her post. She sat at her console, with her feet propped on another chair as she read something on her pad, and sipped a large cup of a drink he had learned was called coffee. When she caught sight of him, she offered a friendly wave, while stifling a giant yawn and double-checking to ensure the ship's speed and trajectory were correct. "When do you even sleep?" Lark inquired, as she moved her legs from the chair, allowing him to sit down. "I don't need much. Ever since I was at the Institute, I could get by on only a few hours of sleep a day. Not sure if it's a genetic trait or something in my brain, but Akron abuses it on a regular basis, so he can get a good night's rest," she smirked. Lark tried to smile back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lauren saw the unease on his face and passed the still hot cup between her hands as she swiveled to face him. "Still dealing with what happened at the colony?" she asked. "Well, yes. No. That was horrible for all of us, but there's something else I was hoping to ask you about." Lark swallowed hard, tilting forward in the chair. Something happened with Angel. She gave him a knowing glance and took another swig. How did you know that? He stared at her, dumbfounded, wondering if he was truly so transparent. Lauren shrugged and glanced up at the screens. I've seen you face death head-on and fight horrible creatures that would make any sane person run screaming. Yet the only time I have seen you truly bothered is when something is wrong between the two of you. He sighed and thought carefully about his words before saying quietly, I told her I loved her, and I think it scared her off. So now I don't know what to do. Lauren suddenly snorted with laughter before trying and failing to regain a stoic expression. What's so funny? He demanded, feeling a spike of irritation. I'm sorry, Lark. It's just that with all your training and experience, you're still so vulnerable when it comes to romance, and frankly, it's adorable, she teased. His expression softened, and he stared down to his interlocked hands. I know Angel and I haven't known each other long, but it just kind of slipped out. Sometimes love happens that way, Lauren consoled him. She casually searched around the bridge to ensure that they were alone before whispering, I knew I loved Sarah the day I saved her from those bullies. Really? He asked, surprised. Yep, she declared, and if you tell anyone, I'll call you a liar, among many other nasty things. She pointed a finger at him with a light-hearted threat. I had known her only for a couple of days at that point, and before I met her, I swore I wasn't interested in love or romance. But when I gazed into her beautiful eyes after knocking out someone twice her size, I knew she was the one for me. She beamed, the joy of the memory evident in her voice. Then what did I do wrong? He muttered. Nothing. You were honest, and that is all anyone can ask of you. It might be that she just needs time to think about it. Maybe it's too serious for her. The best thing you can do is give her time and some space to figure things out, she answered sympathetically. I've been trying to do that, but the waiting is killing me. His shoulders slumped with resignation. I know what you mean. One time, Sarah and I, a violent jolt of the ship interrupted her story. She gripped her seat in the console to anchor herself to her position as the ship jerked again. Lark wasn't fast enough and was thrown from his chair. His back struck the tactical console and he groaned from pain just as the alarms began shrieking. Did we run into something? He yelled when he righted himself. No, it felt like something hit us, she answered, through gritted teeth, examining the monitors. Her jaw dropped wide as the damage report began scrolling across the screens. Something pierced our hull by the living quarters. Something big enough that I have to land so we don't crash. Her voice strained as she fought to retain control of the ship. The ship lurched and tilted. Somehow, he was able to maintain his balance and called to Lauren as he hurriedly left the bridge. I'll go check it out. Seconds after he entered the hallway, a guttural roar met his ears as he broke into a run towards the awful sound. Weapon fire and frantic shouts from the lower level hurried him forward. Immediately after he rushed down the ladder, he drew his sword. A creature skittered along the wall in his direction. Lark almost froze, but his battle instincts drove him onward. It was a blood hunter, but it was unlike any he had seen before. Where the hunters he knew were largely humanoid, these were nightmarishly insectoid. Their rounded head had been elongated, as though it had been crushed and pulled into a crescent. The narrow chin melted with the mouth to form a clicking mandible lined with serrated teeth that winked in the light. The muscular legs had been twisted backward, and the joints swiveled to enhance leaping power. Each leg ended in a sinewy foot that sported 3 wicked talons. When it saw Lark, it let out a clicking trill and raced toward him with shocking speed. Not bothering to slow down, he swung the rebel's heart as he raced past the horror. He felt the sharp tip catch in the flesh, and a terrible rending sound followed as the crystalline blade bit deeper and cleaved further than any metallic sword he had ever used. The hunter exploded in a hail of entrails and foul-smelling blood as each half lost its grip on the wall. It slumped into a heap behind him as he continued to his goal. Further in, Lark saw the hole in the ship's wall and the fleeting figure of Dravik as he was hauled out of the opening by one of the hunters. Dravik thundered profanities as he landed a few solid punches, but the typical hunter's skin was replaced with a gray carapace encased in thick bones, so his attacks had no effect. A screech reverberated down the hallway behind Lark, and he turned to see one of the hunters carrying Maya over its shoulder. She was fighting tooth and nail, causing it to struggle to hold on. Lark lunged forward, turned the sword in his hand, and rammed it upward between the mandibles. Its grip on her slackened, and Lark managed to catch her before her head could hit the ground. Once he set her on her feet. He stepped on the hunter's skull, bursting it like an egg, and tugged hard to free his blade. "Are you all right?" he shouted over the sound of the wind howling through the breach. She nodded shakily, and clasped her trembling hands together. She was covered in cuts and bruises, but it was all superficial. "Get off my ship, you bastard!" An angry voice raged from inside one of the rooms. A weapon fired, and a hunter chittered, sounding more irritated than pained. Lark leaped to the doorway and found it filled with the winged back of a hunter as it was being carried away from the occupant. He grabbed the base of its wings and yanked hard, causing the hunter to bow backward into the hallway. With the chit in his throat now exposed, Lark slashed downward and severed the monster's head from its shoulders. A fountain of blood splattered on the carpet, and the hunter crumbled lifelessly to the ground. He looked up to see Reynard panting and holding his weapon. A wicked gash on his chest oozed blood, but Reynard was too riled up to care. "They took the others!" Reynard seethed and lowered his weapon. Lark rushed to the hole and saw the distant figure of 4 hunters rapidly flapping their way toward the south. Each one held a member of the crew. "Damn!" Lark swore and slammed his hand into the wall next to the opening. "Tell Akron I'm going after them." He whirled around and shot past Maya as she came to tend Reynard's wounds. As Lark neared the cargo bay, he entered a command to his armlet to open his ship and start the ignition sequence. "Let me get the door for you," Akron called over the intercom. The bay doors groaned and whirred to life. "We'll patch the hole and follow you when we can." Lark hesitated for a moment before entering his vehicle. "Who did they get?" After a short pause, Akron responded. "They took Draven, Lily, Bastion, and Angel." It was as though someone kicked him in the stomach. His insides twisted with panic, but it was rapidly replaced by fury. He clenched his fist and could practically feel magic shimmer around his knuckles. Without any further hesitation, Lark climbed into his vehicle and punched in the initiation sequence. He felt a familiar bump of air pressure as the Strider began to hover. Almost before it was ready, he grasped the steering controls and slammed the accelerator towards the slowly opening hatch. It was barely wide enough, but he gave it no thought as he shot out of the narrow opening. He vaguely registered the grass beneath him before his Strider touched down and shot across the landscape. His eyes were fixed on the specks in the sky that were the hunters. He wondered which one carried Angel and vowed that he would get to them in time. Angel fought against her captor, but its grip was unrelenting. She struck its hide with her fist, scratched with her nails, and even tried to bite the limb that carried her. In the end, she was the one getting sore, while the hunter was oblivious to her attacks. Her legs were nearly frozen from the early morning air. She silently wished she hadn't been in her nightgown when she was captured, as she looked around to see her fellow crewmates. Lily was clutching the leg of her kidnapper. Her eyes were screwed shut, but Angel could see her chin quake as she cried. Due to Bastion's height, the hunter who held him had to carry him sideways. He hurled many vicious insults as he tried to swipe at the creature with his fists, but to his frustration, he was out of reach. Dravik wailed at his captor with all his strength. Occasionally, the hunter wavered or swerved, but he didn't appear to be doing any real damage. Without a word of instruction, the hunters began their descent in tandem. She glanced down to see they were nearing a ravine that had dried up long ago. A small metal structure was nestled at the very bottom, underneath a large outcropping. They picked up speed, and her heart leaped into her throat when it felt as though they would crash into the ground. The impact never came. Instead, she was hoisted over the hunter's shoulder as it carried her into the building. Moments later, they were thrown into a room, and the door slammed closed before she hit the ground. Instantly, Bastion was up, trying to wrench the door open, but a grinding click told them they were sealed in. Lark had nearly caught up with the hunters when he saw them sink beneath his field of view. He frowned and tried to recall this area on the maps. Sosarian troops did occasional surveillance here, but it was not considered vital territory, so it was more cursory than anything. Glancing up at the map readout on his screen, he spotted a dry ravine bed and turned towards it, realizing it had to be their destination. As he braced himself, he lifted the nose of his Strider as he went over the lip of the cliff. He felt a strong tug in his stomach as his vehicle sailed through the open air. Peering out, he saw a metal building and the hunters carrying their flailing cargo inside. A flash of blonde hair disappeared behind a closed door, and Lark ground his teeth from anger. With a loud crack, Lark was almost thrown to the side when his strider hit the first rock, followed by a squeal of metal on stone. A second bang came from the front, and the glass window fractured into 100 branches across his field of vision. Finally, his strider landed, the impact dampened by the still working hover system. He powered down his vehicle, braced his shoulder against the inwardly bent door, and rammed it open in one try. Grabbing the rebel's heart, he climbed out and swiftly assessed the vehicle. Smoke started to escape from the front, and the entire left side of the hover treads were shattered. He knew he wouldn't be leaving without help. Rolling his shoulders, he stared down at the building, thinking to himself that he would figure things out after Angel and the others were safe. Lark approached cautiously, but saw the hunters were nowhere. Also missing were any signs of guards, weapons, or sentries. Trying the door, he found it was unlocked. His instincts screamed in warning, but he couldn't let it stop him. The inky darkness stretched out, and he couldn't see more than a meter from the door. He channeled magic into his weapon, and it glowed a brilliant white. He raised it over his head to see the way forward, but the moment he stepped into the main chamber, the door banged shut behind him. He didn't bother checking. He knew he was sealed in. Instead, he walked deeper into the room. It was circular, with 6 doors evenly split between the left and right sides. A long hallway led to a door straight ahead of him. As he analyzed which door to open first, when loud bangs suddenly came from the furthest one, he bolted. When his boot hit the center of the room, the building hummed to life. With a violent buzz, all the lights snapped on one by one, drowning him in a harsh fluorescent light. Momentarily blinded, he covered his eyes and came to a halt as he waited for his sight to adjust. Although the room was nearly pitch black, the 4 captives began wildly searching for an exit. Bastion moved boxes containing various parts of machinery to examine the walls for weak spots or holes. Dravik found a leathery tarp, but without ropes there was no chance of setting a trap. Angel ran her fingers around the door's frame, but there was nothing to exploit. The hinges were flat, and the door was too perfectly fitted to slip the thinnest piece of metal in the gaps. She sat back on her heels and blew out a frustrated sigh. The only way in or out was through the locked door, and no one knew what was on the other side. Lily sat pressed into the corner with her knees drawn tight and her forehead pressed into them. Bastion and Dravik now hunted through the boxes for anything that could be helpful. Dravik muttered curses under his breath as he tossed aside useless scraps. Seeing how Lily was struggling, Angel went and sat next to her. Neither had words of comfort, so they sat in silence. Finally, Lily whispered in the dark between sniffles, "Are we going to be able to get out of here?" Angel's mind went to Lark. She remembered him on the battlefield, fighting like a man possessed as he sliced up rot giants. Tears stung her eyes at the thought of dying in this place. There was so much more she wanted to say and do with him. She knew he would save them, and wouldn't stop fighting until he did. She imagined him throwing open the door and her falling into his arms. He would hold her and tell her that he loved her, and this time she would say it back. She loved him, and wouldn't be content until he heard it. "Yes," Angel replied. She grasped Lily's hand and gingerly squeezed it. "I'm sure of it." Bastion approached the door, carrying an elongated piece of metal that must have once been a lever for a giant machine. Dravik followed behind with his own makeshift weapon. They exchanged a look, and without a word, they began to try and break the door down. At the third blow, the lights flared on, followed by a small screen they hadn't noticed before was bolted into the wall. A familiar face, with black hair and red eyes, came into focus, glaring at something below the camera. "It's Lark!" Angel gasped, feeling her heart race. However, what they all heard next made their collective blood run cold. A soft, familiar chuckle filled the room Lark stood in. "Defiler, I adore how perfectly predictable you are." "Adora!" Lark snarled. His hands clenched the rebel's heart as he glared at the enormous screen that had been set above the hallway entrance. In the transmission, Adora was lounging in a chair, a long-stemmed glass of blood-red wine twirling in his fingers. He swept his golden hair from his eyes and gave Lark a feline grin. "I'm not in the mood to deal with you," Lark called out and resumed his course down the hallway, where the pounding had only grown louder. "You're no fun," Adora mused, and picked a speck of dust off his robe. "But you will be." Lark's foot caught on something hard, and he managed to leap aside and not fall. He glanced down, and his mouth ran dry. White bones that had been picked clean. He grasped it, and prayed that it wasn't familiar as he turned it over in his hands. It had strange canine features, and he nearly sighed in relief. "Ah, yes, the Talarans," Adora exclaimed with a small clap. "They came here some years ago. Extremely friendly people, all too happy to give their ship to the Conclave." Lark doubted the Talarans were as willing as Adora claimed. Their technology was simple. Too simple, really. But they did have some fascinating bioelectric technology, Adora proclaimed. Almost too fast to see, Lark threw the skull as hard as he could at the monitor, but it bounced harmlessly off. Adora cast him a slight smirk and shook his head. How rude. Lark flashed a vulgar gesture at the screen and turned to walk away. When his foot entered the hallway, he heard a loud series of clicks, groans, and doors swinging open. "It was hard to adapt at first," Adora continued, "but we found a way to use it. It powers the structure you're standing in, and the ravenous friends making their way to you now." His laughter rang out through the structure, and Lark could almost feel it vibrate from the walls. "They are incredibly hard to make. We managed only 50 or so, but they are nearly unstoppable. I knew it would be perfect for you and your alien friends," Adora hissed, his voice bursting with glee. Dozens of Wizards staggered into the room. At first, they looked the same as any other Lark had fought before. However, when he fired blasts of essence magic at them, the brilliant light hit the monsters and then disappeared as though it hit a wall. Lark's eyes widened in shock. He stepped towards the closest one and tried to slice it across the chest. The swing bounced off, unable to pierce the thick hide. Up close, he saw that silver veins streaked beneath the tough skin. It was the only physical indicator they were unique. He growled and altered his tactics, using a variety of blows and combinations of magic. None of them had any effect. Panic started to set in when he realized Adora had been telling the truth for once. They were unstoppable. He fell back into the hallway to try to reach the door with the Forerunner crew. "Oh, that's another dead end," Adora chuckled. "In fact, don't even bother trying to escape. The moment you triggered my trap, an electric field went around this entire structure, powering it on and bringing my masterpieces to life. Even if you somehow escape death here, you will never cross that barrier alive." Lark came to a stop. A new doorway down the hall slid open. Several more Wizards tumbled through and began staggering towards him. Now, he was pinned between two groups with nowhere to go. Realization dawned that he was going to be herded into a corner. "This will finally be the end of you," Adora taunted. "You, along with those tiresome people, will die, and the Forerunner will be helpless against me. As you contemplate your failure, enjoy listening to them be eviscerated slowly until they curse your name for ever helping them." Another peal of violent laughter assaulted his ears, and in a rush of fear and fury he shot out one hand, and a sphere of flames exploded forth. It slammed into the monitor, and the scent of burning polymers briefly covered the stench of rot. Chunks of hot, melted sludge sloughed off onto the ground, and Adora's taunts were finally cut off. It was only him and the Wizard now. He whipped his head around to look down the end of the hall. The way behind the main chamber was flooded with the seemingly unkillable Wizard. The way forward was blockaded and no less packed. Monsters were pressed against the crew's door, attempting to pry it open, and despite his desperation, he knew he couldn't get to them. The door the Wizard had just come from was momentarily emptied as the mass moved towards him. The timing had to be perfect, but he now had a plan. He gauged the length of the hallway and bounced on his heels as he took off running. Only 6 Wizards were focused on him. The rest, finally having made a gap, were doubling their efforts to get to the crew. The rest were clustered together, so there was a chance his idea might work. When he got close enough to touch with his hand, he knelt and leaped. A well-timed burst of air magic saw him soaring above their rotted heads, and he landed soundly a few feet behind them. Rushing through the door, he slammed it shut and channeled fire magic through his sword to melt the door latch shut. Heavy limbs slammed on the other side as soon as he was done, and he heard the door shudder. He knew It was only a matter of time before they got inside, and when they were through with him, they would move on to the crew chambers. He thought to himself that they might already be dying now. He might have failed already. Fear and nausea racked through Lark's body. He needed a plan, and he needed it minutes ago. He frantically searched around the room, but it was bare. 4 walls and a door, no furniture of any kind. There wasn't enough time to save himself and the others. He couldn't defeat the Withered. He staggered and nearly collapsed against the wall. The cold terror that Adura may have won washed over him. They could all die. He clenched his hands and struck the wall full force, screaming in his mind that he wouldn't have let Adura succeed. His eyes fixed on the wall and the tiny dent his fist had made. An inspiration struck. He picked up his sword and sliced it into the dense metal of the wall. He worked the blade back and forth until a half-meter hole was formed. Through it, he saw light and felt a cold breeze. Just beyond the wall was the electric field. Carefully, he stretched his hand out and felt a painful snap of electricity mixed with entropy magic. He felt himself lose control as he roared with rage and the need for survival. He rammed his sword through the hole to strike the barrier, and another shock raced up his arm. Over and over he hit the barrier with any magic he could think of, and soon his arm was numb from the feedback. Nothing worked, not even essence magic. He watched the door and saw it was pried off half the hinges as the Withered groaned and clawed to get at him. He needed to dissipate the electric field somehow, or redirect it. He turned to stare at the barrier outside and the serene world just beyond it. He tore a chunk of his tunic and stuffed the wad between his teeth. As he readied the rebel's heart, he heard the door screech off its final hinge and could smell the decay of the Withered entering the room. He decided if his life was to be measured in minutes, they might as well be well spent. He took a deep breath before giving a muffled cry as he plunged the tip of his sword into the barrier and felt the energy arc into his body. Brings us to the end of chapter 16. So, got Adura finally shows himself again. We knew he was plotting something back from the little vignette we saw between him and Darkin. So there's the trap is sprung, and as you might expect, if he's going to be running off with anyone, of course, Angel was going to be one of them. It wouldn't be right otherwise, right? But seems they've conveniently got something that is immune to essence magic and immune to physical trauma. So I have a feeling, I don't know, it's something. Yeah, exactly. There are rules that must be followed. I have a feeling that we may see Lark tap into another side in this exchange. Maybe. We'll see. I could see it happening. But let's take a few minutes. I need a fresh cup of tea. I'll leave you guys to stew with that for a little bit while I get ready, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thanks, guys. Okay. Man, electric kettles are great. Doesn't take any time at all to get them to a boil. We'll let this steep for a little bit, and we can start reading a little bit before we let it sit too long. So, let's go ahead and get right back into it, because we're kind of at a exciting turn here, so we don't want to leave too much hanging. So we return to chapter 17. We must press on no matter what. Death is a small price to pay when the fates of entire worlds are at stake. Dravik, Angel, and Bastian stood side by side, wielding machinery straps as makeshift weapons. Lily huddled behind them with an armful of metal chunks, ready to throw them at any moment. The Withered had bent the door back a quarter of the way, and one had been wriggling itself through the aperture when suddenly every light snuffed out, plunging them into darkness. A loud series of thumps sounded from the hallway, and the Withered that had been fighting to get them went limp across the bent door like so many dolls with cut strings. Dravik cautiously walked over and struck the monster with the butt of his pipe. It didn't move. He grunted as he shoved the decayed body off and, with Bastian's help, managed to pry the door open. Outside, the hallway was packed with still and lifeless figures of withered bodies clear into the main chamber. Slowly, they edged out of the room. Angel kicked one over with her bare foot and saw that it had no injuries. It's as though they just stopped moving, Bastian observed, still holding the weapon in front of him. Everyone, search the building! Lark should still be around here somewhere, Dravik shouted to the others. The camera had only been in the main chamber. As soon as Lark entered the hallway, they'd lost sight of him. Angel had grabbed Lily's hand and held it tight when they saw the horde of Withered chase after him. Now, they were searching through the bodies and praying he wasn't among them. Lily found him first. She had been picking her way through the corpses and came to the doorway that had been torn apart. There, on the floor, Lark lay twitching, surrounded by charred Withered. Her shouts echoed through the structure, followed by the sound of 3 pairs of feet thundering towards her. Dravik was next through the door. His military training in field medicine took over, and he assessed Lark's wounds. His clothes were nearly burned away, leaving only a few charred scraps of his pants remaining. From head to toe, he had suffered extreme burns, the greatest of which being his arms and legs. "We need Maya now!" Dravik shouted. Lark was unresponsive, and the young man's armlet was fried with no chance of communication. "I'll go look outside," Bastian declared, and hurried from the room. Lily followed him, leaving Lark with Angel and Dravik. Angel stared hard at Lark's face, as though she were memorizing the details. She sat at his side with her hands balled up in her lap. "Go on," Dravik said gruffly. She snapped her watery eyes up at him in confusion. He merely inclined his head toward Lark. "Hold his hand, girl. I know that's what you want," he answered her unspoken thoughts. Tentatively, she took his right hand into hers. The skin was nearly hot as an iron from the fire, and she carefully stroked whatever intact skin she could find. They stayed like that until Bastian and Lily returned with the rest of the crew. It was Lauren who gently pulled her away from Lark as Reynard, Tarn, Dravik, and Akron hoisted him into an emergency sled. Maya followed behind them, giving precise orders as they rushed him to the medical bay. Angel didn't even realize she was crying until she stepped outside and felt the cold trail of her tears in the mid-morning air. "I have something I need to tell him," Angel murmured. Lauren patted her shoulder and silently steered her back to the Forerunner. Each hour that ticked by felt like an eternity for the crew. Lark had become a friend to each person there, and had saved most of them at least once, so it was unspoken that they would use any methods at their disposal to do the same for him. The entire ship was exceptionally quiet. After Dravik had given his report on the events at the facility, Akron put the ship on alert for any sign of Adura. If he truly thought Lark was dead and the Forerunner crippled, it was suspected he might try another assault. The place in the hull where the ship had been pierced was patched, but Dravik and Angel worked hard to reinforce it. Neither spoke, as fear for their friend and anger for their abduction welled within them. Lily felt safest in her hydroponics bay, and was tasked with synthesizing nutrient fluids to be administered to Lark while he was unconscious. Maya and Bastian worked tirelessly in the surgical suite to keep him alive. After the third time the alarm sounded to indicate Lark's heart had stopped, Maya had them disabled. Reynard worked in the drive room and tried not to ruminate on what he could have done to prevent the breach. Akron and Lauren had their places at the bridge. Both of them were scanning constantly for signs of the conclave. Tarn made his rounds, with fresh coffee and food that went largely uneaten. Everyone was too stressed to eat. The day dragged on into the night, and Angel barely noticed. She fell into the rhythm that she knew well, and it wasn't until almost midnight that Dravik carefully pulled the spot welder from her hand. "Go to bed," he sighed, looking just as tired as she felt. "I want to help," Angel mumbled, and tried to reach for her tool. "You won't be of help to anyone if you can't keep your eyes open during your shift tomorrow, and you know it," he countered with a surprising gentleness. She had no will to argue. They still hadn't heard any word about Lark, and burying herself in bed to hide from the world sounded wonderful. Taking her leave, Angel stumbled back to her quarters. Tonight, she ignored her brush, books, datapads, and even the food unit, despite her stomach twisting from hunger. All she wanted was sleep. In her dreams, the man she loved was healthy, when in reality, she wasn't even sure if he was still alive. Angel climbed under the covers, not bothering to take off her uniform or boots, and from sheer exhaustion, she was asleep before she hit the pillow. Some hours later, she awoke to a gentle nudge on her shoulder. She groaned and rubbed her eyes. The room was dark, but she smelled the acrid scent of disinfectant. "You can come see him now," Maya said quietly. "He's out of surgery." Her fatigue vanished in a blink, and she gave Maya a bone-crushing hug before darting out of the room. Maya sat in their quarters, eating a platter of poached eggs and a pepper and tomato sauce. It was the middle of the night, but it was the first meal she'd eaten since the previous day's breakfast. And when Akron told Tarn that Maya was ready for food, he whipped up one of her favorite dishes. She was almost too exhausted to lift the fork to her mouth as Akron sat beside her, waiting to see if she needed anything else. "Who's with him now?" Akron asked, watching with relief that she was finally getting some food in her. "Angel," she answered. "I knew she'd want to be with him." With a resigned sigh, she continued, "There's nothing more I can do." Akron knew how skilled of a doctor his wife was, and hearing her say there was nothing left made his stomach clench. "Is he going to make it?" he asked. Any pretense was dropped between them, and she could see the genuine fear on his face. She took a sip of her water. "I don't know. I worked on him for 14 hours, and he nearly died on me more times than I can count. Whatever energy he absorbed did something to his regeneration abilities, so they never activated. All we can do at this point is hope that he pulls through." It does sound like Shakuka, doesn't it? She dropped her fork and leaned against him. He was there immediately, kneeling on the floor and wrapping his arms around her waist. She rested her cheek on his head, and he could feel her fighting the urge to break down. "Being captain is hard enough," he admitted as he began to stroke her back, "but I could never handle your job." "Sometimes I wonder if I can too," she nearly choked. "Times like this make me regret encouraging Rowan to follow my career path." Despite the thick layer of gloom, Akron managed to smile at the mention of their son. "At least we had the good sense to tell him to stay home and focus on his studies at the Institute." They shared a moment of relieved silence that their child was safe, a far distance away. Drawn back into the present, Maya looked down until her eyes settled on her datapad. "Did you see the files we pulled from that underground facility?" She straightened up and picked it up from their chair beside her. "I did," he answered, grabbing her free hand. He didn't want to relive it, but he knew it would help her to talk about it. "They turned children into weapons," she seethed. "They conscripted ones they deemed worthy, but then they filled the rest with entropy magic and left just enough of their consciousnesses intact so they would go searching for help. When they found their way to a village or group of people, they would detonate to infect everyone." Tears streamed down her face, but it didn't mask the fury in her eyes. "I know," he whispered. Maya stood up to pace their room. Her exhaustion evaporated. Angel told me about a scarred little girl she met in Sosaria, and up till now, I thought that was one of the most horrible things we've seen. It sickens me to think she was one of the lucky ones. She ranted and wrung her hands together. I remember, he folded his arms. I can't take this anymore, Akron. I can't see this kind of evil all around me and go on knowing we won't do anything. We need to help this world fight back. Her voice rose until she was practically shouting. We will, Akron said simply. Maya stopped dead in her tracks and stared at her husband. What? We're going to help the people of Durance fight the Conclave. He stood and rested his hands on her shoulders, stroking them gently with his thumbs. The expression of shock on her face quickly melted into relief, and she pulled him into a fierce embrace. What made you change your mind? A lot of things, he admitted. I've wanted to fight back ever since Adora first tried to attack us. Since then, I've realized our laws are protecting the monsters here more than the people. Maya sat on their bed and felt a new wave of exhaustion hit. What about the rest of the crew? Have you told them yet? Akron chuckled. No, but almost the entire crew has told me about their feelings on the matter. Lauren wanted to fight them out right out of the gate. Angel believes they would be a threat to our entire galaxy if they ever made it off the planet. Then Dravik and Tarn have separately approached me to say we can't maintain neutrality any longer. Maya struggled to smile through her yawn and lay back on her plush pillow as she teased. So you caved to popular opinion. He sat beside her and ran his fingers through her hair, something he often did to help her sleep. She sighed blissfully at his touch. Maybe a little. More than that, though, this recent attack was the last straw for me. We will never be safe so long as they are hunting us, and we can't risk them getting their hands on the neutron charges or the Nova Drive. Maya mumbled something incoherent, but Akron gleaned she was happy with his decision. He gave her one last kiss before he sent a message through the comm system for his crew to meet him in the mess hall in 1 hour. He went back to the table and picked up Maya's pad. As much as it pained him, he went through the surgery report one more time. The medical bay smelled of clean linen, antiseptic, and charred flesh. Angel couldn't tell if the scent was coming from Lark or if it was her memories from the facility that lingered. A monitor that measured his vital signs beeped rhythmically from the wall above his bed. Maya had turned the alarms back on and given her medication to administer if his heart stopped. Her hands had shaken as Maya went over the instructions, but thankfully, his heartbeat had only fluttered twice briefly before returning to normal. She was used to pulling all-nighters from her days at the Institute and working in the drive room, and right now, there was no place she would rather be. She examined the pump that provided medications through a needle line Maya had carefully placed through his arm and into his heart. He was receiving large volumes of fluids that Lily had been working tirelessly to produce in her lab. Maya promised to be back before the next bag had to be hung, which looked like it would be a few hours. Angel bit her lower lip as her gaze moved to him and his face and body covered in bandages. Maya assessed the worst of it was on his hands, arms, legs, and feet. However, the electricity and entropy magic had coursed through his whole body for so long that every other part of him was also severely burned. With shaky hands, Angel picked up the regenerator unit on the bedside table. It was administered every half hour, but with the extensive damage, it had little to no effect. All they could do now was try and keep him alive long enough for him to regain consciousness so his natural regeneration would kick in, or for his body to heal just enough that their technology could help. She pressed a button, and the device hummed to life in her hand. She couldn't see under his blood-tinged bandages to know if it was working, but she held out hope. It was important to her that he knew he was successful in saving them when he woke up, and she would do anything to make that happen. She caught the regenerator as she fumbled it and set it back on the table. Her eyes stung from fresh tears. Not when, if he wakes up. He could still die. I could still lose him, she thought to herself as a wave of regret crashed over her. Once again, she felt shame and anger that she ran from him when he confessed his feelings. She buried her face in her hands and finally broke down crying. She didn't notice the blanket shift as the wrapped body in front of her began to stir. Dry lips parted, and she heard a rasping cough that brought her from her reverie. Her heart raced as his head slowly turned side to side, but he could only move barely a centimeter in either direction. His pained groans echoed through the medical bay, and Angel leaned over him. His entire head was swaddled in bandages, leaving only his mouth and chin exposed. What happened? His hoarse voice was barely a whisper. It's okay, Lark, she reassured softly, gently, as though she might break him, and placed her hand on his. I'm here. You're alive, he murmured, his raspy voice flooded with relief. Thought lost you. Each word was slow and strained. I'm fine. Everyone is fine. You destroyed the electric field and killed the creatures with it. We're all alive, thanks to you. She tried to keep her voice from shaking, despite being filled with emotion. She gently stroked his hand and nearly sang for joy when he gave her a weak squeeze in return. Now, we're doing our best to keep you alive. He squeezed her fingers again. What I said, he began. Anxiety radiated off his body, and his breathing and heart rate began to speed up and become erratic. Don't strain yourself. We can talk about it later, when you're better, she pleaded. She wanted nothing more than to hug him close, but she knew it would have to wait. He grunted, grasped her hand tighter, and shook his head as much as his bandages allowed. Sorry. Hurt you. His words were laced with panic, as though he needed them to be his last. No, I'm sorry, she whispered. His desire to make her happy in the face of his pain removed any lingering doubts she may have had about her feelings for him. Without further hesitation, she brushed her lips against his. I love you too. He said nothing, but his heart seemed to regulate, and his thumb stroked her hand. I'll be right here with you, she reassured him, and caressed his bandaged cheek. You just rest and get better. Nodding weakly, his body slowly relaxed, and he grew still again. Within minutes, he was asleep, and the monitor slowed to a steady rhythm. Angel sent a message through her pad to both Akron and Maya to update them on his condition. She turned the lights down, pushed the closest treatment bed against his, and climbed under the starched white sheets. As she drifted off, she placed her hand on his bandaged arm. She wanted to feel that he was still alive and beside her, and she hoped that, in a way, he could feel it as well. Just as she drifted off, she heard the door to the medical bay open. She groggily glanced over, and when she saw it was Akron, she scrambled to get on her feet. At ease, Akron whispered, motioning for her to stay put. He walked over and took in Lark's sleeping form. I just got your message. How is he? He asked. Better. I was able to give him an update on all of us, which seemed to help him a lot. I told him to rest and heal, and that we're all working hard for him, she reported. Akron beamed and wiped his eyes. Are you going to stay here with him? He asked, gesturing towards the beds. Yes, she replied. I want to be here if he needs anything or if his condition changes. All right, but if you need someone to take over, just let us know, Akron ordered. Angel settled back onto her bed. Akron knew she would be asleep before he reached the hallway. Almost forgot. I'm gathering the rest of the crew to discuss joining the fight against the Conclave. I'm guessing that isn't a problem for you? He inquired, although he knew the answer. Angel murmured a response he was already sure of. As Akron left the medical bay, he felt a renewed vigor in his step as he walked to the mess hall. The crew was tired. Bastien sat beside Reynard on one of the benches and kept dozing off. After 5 minutes, his head slumped onto the tactical officer's shoulder. But rather than pushing him upright, Reynard held completely still so the historian could sleep. Lily and Lauren were hunched over cups of coffee, and Dravik stood chatting with Tarn as the cook prepared breakfast. Soon, the smell of sizzling meat and griddle cakes wafted through the room. When Akron entered, he motioned for everyone to stay in their places. We're still waiting on Maya and Angel, Lauren declared as she added more sugar to her mug. Maya's resting. After spending most of the day keeping Lark alive, she's earned her rest, Akron reported and gestured to Bastien, who let out a snore from his seat. Angel is staying in the medical bay to keep an eye on him as he recovers. She reports that he temporarily regained consciousness. Relieved smiles lit up the crew's faces. Reynard even woke Bastion to quietly share the good news. Now that the important details are out of the way, let's talk about repairs. Akron's eyes landed on Dravik first. Angel and I fixed the hull, so we're ready to go airborne again, Dravik relayed to the crew. What about those frequency upgrades? Akron directed the question at Lauren. She pulled a pad from her jacket pocket and opened the report. We brought the Earth frequency upgrade online after the hull repairs were finished. We've gained a 76% increase in hull integrity. Fire and air are still being implemented, but our projections show they will improve our weapons power and flight system efficiency by 40 to 50%. May I see that? Renard requested with a kernel of excitement in his eyes. Lauren flashed a cocky grin before chucking the pad to her cousin. Bastion watched over his shoulder to study the data as well. Looks like it'll improve our thrusters too, Reynard observed. Lauren chuckled. Good. I've often thought this ride is too slow. Well, maybe the way you drive, Reynard quipped. What's that supposed to mean? Lauren nearly yelled. I'll have you know, I scored... Akron cleared his throat to stop her tirade, but he couldn't hide the amusement in his eyes. This is a meeting, people. Is there any progress with the water frequency? Lily raised her hand, and when Akron indicated she should speak, she stated, Lark and Angel found it just before we reached the Ravagers, so it's only just being tested. It has no use with our primary systems, sir. I've been experimenting with my equipment in the lab, though, and I think it could be implemented there with our food processors and medical equipment. Well done. I want a full report from you as soon as possible, Akron ordered somberly. But I didn't gather us here just to talk about upgrades. We need to discuss what to do about the Conclave. Blast him to hell, Tarn shouted as he cracked eggs to make more batter. Akron laughed at the abrupt statement. Yes, Tarn, I'm well aware of your opinion, and the other opinions of those who have come to talk to me, but this isn't a decision I can make as a captain alone. If we're going to disregard our laws and get pulled into a conflict of this magnitude, it needs to be a decision we make as a crew. Everyone glanced at each other, some murmuring and others sharing knowing looks. The conversation shifted to how they would fight, and not if they should. Akron caught Lily's eye and turned his attention directly to her. You were the first to make a case for our laws in the beginning, Lily. Your opinion matters just as much as anyone here, he reassured. Lily turned to Reynard, who shot her an encouraging smile. She dipped her head before focusing back on her captain. I don't want to fight, sir, she began. I joined this crew so that we could explore space, make friends, and try to make our world a better place. Everyone stayed silent as Lily maintained eye contact with Akron. Even as her voice trembled and her eyes filled with tears. But this conclave and its monsters are horrible. I have nightmares every night, and now, after today, she swallowed hard. I can't bear to think what would happen if they somehow were unleashed on other worlds. We need to stop them here, before they hurt anyone else. Akron solemnly nodded. Does anyone have a problem with us fighting the Conclave? Lauren put her arms around Lily's shoulders. Reynard and Bastion looked at Akron together and slowly shook their heads. After a full minute of silence, Akron declared, "Then it's decided." The room erupted into applause, and Lauren stood to give a loud cheer. After a couple of minutes of excited talking and celebration, Akron clapped to regain their attention. Those frequency upgrades are our top priority. After you've triple-checked them, I want you to test them extensively. We need to know what to expect in a fight, Akron commanded. Next, make sure the engine is in top condition. I want the neutron charges inspected. We might need every resource we have in the coming fight. Any questions? When silence was his answer, he took a plate of food from Tarn and called to the others as he left. Then get a full meal, and let's get to work. Reynard, with me. His tactical officer fell in step behind him, and the two headed towards the cargo bay. Did you bring it back aboard? Akron asked, as he began to devour his food. As you ordered, sir, Reynard informed. Though I don't know what good it'll do. He pressed the button to open the cargo doors, and they entered the brightly lit space. There, in the center of the room, sat what was left of Lark's Strider. Akron whistled as he circled the broken vehicle. It's amazing he survived the fall, he observed as he ran his hand over the fist-sized dents across the doors. He is remarkably hard to kill, it seems, Reynard remarked. He took stock of the Strider and heaved a great sigh. We might be able to start it up, but I give it 5 minutes before it falls apart. What do you want to do with it? We fix it, Akron answered simply. I want it restored to its original condition, and then I want to upgrade it with anything we can. That way, he'll be better equipped if we are attacked again. Reynard stared at the Strider as he got lost in thought. Something wrong, crewman? Akron inquired, folding his arms behind his back and facing Reynard fully. Sir, this technology we're developing with the elemental frequencies, if we can replicate it, we could revolutionize the fleets back home. We might even find uses for it outside of ship construction, he exclaimed, his speech speeding up the more excited he became. Suddenly, his face faltered. However, it will be much easier to implement if we had Lark coming back with us. Akron patted Reynard on the shoulder. I know, but we need to focus on the Conclave first. For now, though, coordinate with Dravik and get this heap functional again. I want it ready by the time we get to the star canopies. Reynard pulled out his pad, and then began jotting down notes about the systems the Strider possessed and recommended upgrades. Akron leaned against the wall and rubbed his face with calloused palms. He knew his journal entry that night would include a lot of explanations. That brings us to the end of chapter 17. Made a discovery. My Batman voice is almost as bad as my French. The croaky, wounded Lark voice was a discovery. We can only hope he recovers fast enough that I don't need to make that voice again. But so now it's good to see the crew are taking center stage at this point. It's been pretty much the Lark show for most of this part of the book so far, which isn't bad. He's an interesting character, but we started the book with the crew of the Forerunner, and it's good to see them sort of taking their stand. They've got a military style background, so starting to flex that and moving into action is a nice change of pace. Should probably lay off the Sig Zakamos. But yeah, so I think this is a nice turn, a shift. While Lark is down and out for now, as I imagine it'll be at least a chapter or so before he's really up to full speed again. It'll be good to see the crew, the captain, and everyone being the driving force of the story. It's, as with any of these things, that all books tend to become ensemble pieces, and if anyone's not carrying their weight, it shows. So this is their time to shine and take center stage. All right. Well, yeah, you know what? That'll do it too. When you gotta get the growl out, that'll ruin the chops. That's for sure. All right, let's continue. We've got time yet for one, maybe two chapters yet tonight. We'll see how far we make it through this. So, chapter 18. Failure is always a possibility. Letting it stop us is not. Lark was able to sit upright without groaning in pain for the first time in days. He could tell Maya was in front of him by the sound of her breathing and the smell of the sanitizer she used. You have got to be the most reckless person I have ever met, she sighed in exasperation. And considering my husband, that is quite an achievement. He felt her hands grazing his hair as she unfastened the bandages over his eyes. It was the moment of truth. Maya had been direct with him earlier and reminded him that she and Bastian had done their best, but some blindness could persist. As the bandages fell away, he had to squint from the lights. Open up, Maya ordered softly, as she used a small penlight to test his eye reflexes. Your pupils react well, and they're symmetrical. How do you feel? He blinked several times to try and get rid of the fuzzy outlines. Things are a bit blurry. That's better than nothing, she comforted, as she tossed the bandages into a waste unit. So, can I sleep in my own bed tonight? He asked hopefully. Over the previous couple of days, he had healed much of his body, and now the only bandages were on his arms and chest. He was tired of the medical bay and its constant beeping, hard beds, and that one light that he swore constantly clicked when no one else was around. It was time for a change, and he was eager to be in his room. I know your condition has been rapidly improving, but your internal organs have just barely been restored, and you have wounds that need monitoring. You can barely walk, and your vision is still blurry. It's just not safe, Maya insisted and placed her hands on her hips. I'll take it easy, I promise. You have me bandaged, nice and tight, and Angel will be with me all night if anything goes wrong. As he finished his sentence, Lark's eyes widened in realization of his own words. She'll be close by, I mean. Look, she began with a resigned sigh, and tapped a message on her console. Angel will come here after her shift and help you to your room. You can spend the night there, but I expect you to be here first thing in the morning for a checkup. Got it? He nodded enthusiastically. Anything to not be there another night. Maya helped ease him back onto the bed and dimmed the light so he could rest while he waited. As she was leaving, she glanced back to Lark and said with an amused glimmer in her eyes, "And no strenuous physical activities until further notice. Doctor's orders." He groaned and pulled the sheet over his head. Lark, Angel whispered as she gingerly stroked the uncovered parts of his neck. His pale skin was covered in pink splotches, the remnants of his burns, and with time, it would be as if the horrible incident hadn't happened. However, she didn't know if she would ever be able to forget the sight of him on that floor for as long as she lived. His eyes fluttered open, and he narrowed his brow. Angel? No, you're not dreaming, she giggled, and lowered her head to place a gentle kiss on his cheek. I heard you're ready for your own bed now. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her onto the bed and against his chest. More than ready, he reassured as he gave her a slow, passionate kiss. Abruptly, he sighed, and his grip loosened. Maya said not to strain myself, he grumbled. I know, she told me, Angel teased, and pulled from his arms entirely. He blinked in surprise. You've changed. You would have been mortified at me for letting that slip not long ago. She helped him sit up, and brought a crutch to brace against as he stood. A lot has changed since then, Lark, she admitted, and wrapped an arm around his waist. Working together, they stood him up, and between the crutch on one side and Angel on the other, he managed to not fall over. And, well, Maya was the one I talked to after you and I first kissed, Angel continued, with an embarrassed cough. He couldn't see her clearly, but he knew she was blushing. He turned his head to kiss her cheek, but it was too much of a correction, and with a yelp, he fell to the side and crashed into the doorframe. Are you okay? Angel cried out frantically, inspected his bandages for reopened wounds. Damn my legs, he snarled. They don't even feel that damaged. I just need to get used to walking again. She struggled to haul him back up, and they resumed their trek to his room at his insistence. Your legs were severely burned, Angel explained. When you took all that electricity through your arms, it exited through your feet where you touched the ground. He grunted in acknowledgement, thinking perhaps another time he'd find that fascinating. For now, his head was pounding, and he was starting to feel dizzy. He silently wondered if his room had been moved farther away when they finally entered his quarters. He practically dove onto his bed. Angel turned off the lights and changed into nightclothes before lying beside him. She pulled the thick blanket over them both and snuggled into his chest. Maya says you can have some normal food tomorrow. Any idea what you want? She asked as she listened to the comforting pulse of his heart. Pizza, he muttered. Are you sure? You can fix anything you like. Steak, fish. Oh, Tarn has a lot of new spices. He could whip up one of those Sosarian dishes we had at the banquet. She offered with her best attempt to sound sincere. She had already asked Tarn to prepare pizza for the next day, but it was still fun to tease him. Pizza, he repeated, sounding very serious. Pizza it is then, she giggled and gently kissed the healed skin of his collarbone. Angel stayed up, listening to the steady rhythm of Lark's heart under her ear. She counted each beat and let them lull her to sleep. And for the first time in days, she didn't have nightmares. The next morning, Angel slowly woke up and realized she was alone. Just as she was out of bed and sending an alert to Maya that Lark was missing, she heard a low humming along with the shower running. "Didn't you promise Maya that you'd be careful?" Angel asked firmly as she leaned against the bathroom doorframe. "You could fall in there." "And yet I haven't," Lark smiled defiantly. "My legs feel much better, and I desperately need a shower. If you're really that concerned, you can come in here and help me." "I'll pass for now," she refused, prompting a playful whine from her lover. "I am not enabling your delinquency." "Fine," he grumbled, and soon resumed his low humming. 10 minutes later, when he emerged from the shower, he wore a towel around his waist and dried his ebony hair with another. For the first time since he was wounded, Angel could fully see his body. "I didn't think your scars would be that bad," she practically whispered. Branched white tendrils carved deep paths from both hands, entwining up his arms, across his shoulders, and to the center of his chest. She could imagine the mirroring bolt of electricity that created them, and felt overwhelmed once more that he almost died. She quickly averted her eyes to hide the tears welling up. "Angel?" Lark asked, his voice laced with concern. He crossed the small room in 2 strides and gathered her into his embrace. Fiercely, she wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest, her mouth brushing the scars that gathered over his heart. "I'm so glad you're okay," she gasped, and her shoulders trembled from the force it took not to break down crying. "I'm just sorry you have those scars now." He scoffed playfully and squeezed her waist. "Only some of many, and at least I have a great story to go with this one." "I bet they all have great stories," she smiled and pulled away from him. "Oh no, I have some extremely dumb ones too," he declared, and turned to show her a particularly wicked one on the back of his left calf. "See this one?" Angel knelt and ran a slow hand over it. "I was trying to show off during a visit to the treekin and fell out of one of their trees," he chuckled. "I was being particularly stupid." She burst out laughing and shook her head. "Oh, I want to hear more about that." "Well, when we reach the treekin, you can ask the matriarch's niece about it. She loves telling that story to whoever will listen." She smirked and pulled a set of clothes from his dresser and donned a dark blue tunic and loose black pants. As he sat on the bed to lace his boots, Angel helped clean up the rest of his clothes and discarded bandages. Much to his delight, she had insisted she stay in the room during his recovery. "We'd better get you to Maya before she sends Reynard or Akron to drag you there," Angel warned him. The grin on his face said he was eager for the challenge, but obediently, he stood with only the slightest sway to maintain his balance. "Lead the way." "This is much nicer than I expected," Lark observed as he examined the recreation room. After his checkup, followed by a lunch in which Lark almost consumed his body weight in pizza, he asked if there was somewhere he could go to perform some basic exercises. "I'm surprised you haven't been here yet," Angel stated. "Well, between worrying about the Conclave and courting you, my schedule has been pretty full," he explained, walking over to a set of weights. He experimentally lifted one of the heavier ones and was delighted that the numbness in his fingers was nearly gone. "Was there something specific you had in mind?" She motioned to the other equipment as well as some games in the large room. "I'm not sure. Usually I would practice alone or train with someone to keep my strength and reflexes in top shape. I wouldn't know where to start here." He visually searched around the room, feeling lost. "You could spar with me if you want," Angel offered. He stopped and stared at her, visibly confused by her suggestion. "Really? I didn't see any weapons here, and I had no idea you knew how to use any." Actually, when I was at the Institute, I was pretty good with a short weapon when I did physical training." She smirked at his reaction. but I was thinking of something simpler that would be easier on your body, like basic martial arts. We could take it slow to help you get your muscles going again. Martial arts? He asked, slowly enunciating the words. Combat? Just using your body? Hands and feet? She listed more details, but his expression indicated it was still going over his head. I pretty much only fight with my sword. We're trained to throw a punch or stomp a kneecap if we become disarmed, but that doesn't sound nearly as sophisticated as what you're talking about. Despite the lack of understanding, he was genuinely curious. Here, let me show you. She spaced her feet apart, and with her right foot closest to Lark, and extended her hand. He mirrored her actions, and watched intently. Angel closed her fist and went to strike him. It was fast, but almost no power was behind it. He blocked it easily, but was unprepared for the follow-up strike from her other hand, and a subsequent quick kick. He staggered back in surprise from the speed and the variety of attacks. I'm starting to see what you mean. Show me again. He took a deep breath and matched her stance once more. They spent the better part of the hour blocking and exchanging blows. He was an apt student and rapidly improved with his deflection and return of attacks. At the last round, Angel swept his legs out from beneath him and kneeled beside him. I concede, he declared, and raised his arms in surrender. Angel grinned and leaned down to kiss him gently. I'm impressed. You're a swift learner. Suddenly, remembering his recent injuries, her playfulness evaporated and was replaced with worry as she began to examine him to see if any wounds had reopened. He sat up and wiped the sweat that dripped down his face. I'm fine. Promise. I just need to catch my breath. Once she was confident that nothing was wrong, Angel handed him a bottle of water she had set on the edge of the grappling mat. You know, you're the first man I've sparred with that didn't mind losing. Oh, I knew I was going to lose. I had no idea what I was doing, and you clearly did. Lark laughed and drank the entire bottle in one go. Besides, my father taught me to use every loss as a learning technique. And what did you learn from this? She asked. That I've been on my back far too long. Irritation blazed in his words, but as soon as he focused on her again, he softened and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and that you are full of surprises. Angel blushed at the compliment and rested her head on his shoulder. And full of anxiety. The captain wants me to get in contact with Drossen and Beldas, so we can start planning to be part of this alliance they're building. I have no idea how to go about it, though. You seemed to get along with them just fine before. Lark brushed his lips against her cheek and snaked his arm around her shoulders. Your comment about the Conclave being afraid of them working together was exceptional. Thanks, but a simple conversation is one thing. Discussing what they need from us and possible battle plans is a completely different matter. We haven't met the Treekin yet, and I have no idea what they are like. On top of all that, I'm at a complete loss as to what to do about Sosaria, or even if they would even want anything to do with us. She released a frustrated sigh and buried her face in her hands. You're getting too far ahead of yourself, Angel, Lark said quietly, rubbing her back. What do you mean? Her eyes met his and were filled with her need for help. Just take it one step at a time. Talk to Beldas first. Drossen might still be busy getting his pack in order. Don't worry about battles or plans. Just talk to them. Go with your heart and be honest. He squeezed her hand. I could help if you want. No. If I'm representing the ship, I must do it alone. And besides... She took his hand and stood up, pulling him from his seat. You should be getting back to bed. Her eyes lit up with mischievous delight, and he shook her head. Doctor's orders, she reminded him and poked his sternum. Fine. Boring sleep it is, he groused. And for dinner, you're having something filling and nutritious, she ordered as they left the recreation room. Taking a personal hand in my recovery, he teased, and pulled her tight against him, reveling in how perfectly she fit in his arms. Something like that. A few people have made me promise them that you would be well taken care of. Her voice took on a serious edge, and her concern was once again evident. Well, we wouldn't want to disappoint them, he smirked. Don't worry. I'll stay in bed and eat whatever they give me. You just remember what I said, and try not to overanalyze things. Deal. She kissed him before he entered his room. She wished she could spend more time with him, but she did have work to do. As she made her way to the drive room, she tried to put Lark's words into action as she began to plan what she would say to the Lord of Stone and Pack Leader. Lauren sat on the edge of the pilot's seat. Her eyes constantly scanned the darkness of Durance for signs of a threat, but there were only the occasional trees or geographical formations to break up the darkness. "You're going to get a cramp in your neck if you sit like that for too long," a sudden voice observed from behind her. She swiveled around in alarm, but settled back with a resigned chuckle when she saw her cousin standing there holding a cup of something hot. "That for me?" she asked, more than a little hopeful. He shook his head and took a long sip. "It's tea with an absurd amount of sweetener." She wrinkled her nose in distaste. She hated tea. After a moment, she tentatively inquired, "How's that chest wound?" Her eyes flicked to the screen. "Maya was able to patch me up just fine. There's only a little tenderness here and there." Lauren stayed silent. He had been in the military for years, but never talked about what happened during his service, preferring to laugh it off or deflect any probing questions. Sometimes, though, he'd stay up all night, and after the attack, she had a feeling this was one of those times. "I still can't believe you were actually joining the fight, or we're actually joining the fight," Reynard marveled after several minutes. "I thought we'd stand by our neutrality directive until the end." "Neither can I," Lauren agreed. "I was worried we'd be stuck here forever while the Conclave killed everyone and saved us for last." She ran her fingers through her short, russet hair. "That's true. Although, we must be prepared for the chance that we still won't make it out of this alive," Reynard pointed out. A spike of uncertainty pierced Lauren's usual bravado, and she faltered. Exploration missions always carried a level of danger, and the encounters with the Conclave certainly increased that risk. However, being reminded their lives would be jeopardized yet again disquieted her. Reynard noticed her faraway look, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he murmured, "I bet you haven't written a letter for Sarah in a while. Why don't you take a break and do that? I can watch the controls for a few hours." She wiped a few tears that began to roll down her cheeks and nodded as she stood up. The letter wouldn't be delivered in months, if it ever reached her wife at all, but somehow, writing to her made the distance between them seem much smaller. "Thanks," she nearly whispered as she hurried from the bridge. She wanted to get to her room as soon as possible. Reynard had finished his tea about an hour later and lazily passed the mug from hand to hand. There was nothing in the void of the night except sparse forests. It could easily lull someone to sleep or cause their minds to wander to all the bad thoughts that plagued them. He refused both options and instead mulled over the possible strategies they would use against the Conclave. The door to the bridge slid open, and he listened closely without turning. The footsteps were familiar, but not Lauren's. He grinned. The steps were too heavy to be any of the women, but the timing between steps was longer than that of Lark or Akron. Dravik and Tarn wouldn't come to the bridge at this time of night, so that left one possibility. "What do you need, Bastian?" Reynard asked, and the person halted. "How did you know it was me?" came an incredulous reply. Reynard stood and set the mug on the console. His fatigue was hitting him full force, but still, he managed a confident smile. "Call it a sixth sense." Bastian stood flustered, but when the historian said nothing more, he continued. "Did you need something?" "It seems as soon as I finish one page of translations, 4 more appear on the pile." Bastian groaned with an almost pained expression. "I love the challenge, but I need a break." "So you came to talk to Lauren?" Reynard filled in. "Akron, actually. I thought he might still be up," Bastian replied. "Unfortunately, the captain was in the drive room, last I saw, but you're welcome to chat with me," Reynard offered. Bastian's eyes widened, and his face lit up. "I'd like that." "I'm surprised to see you up." He motioned for Bastian to sit at the console next to him, and took his place back in the pilot's seat. "I'm surprised to see you up," Bastian observed. "I would have thought you'd be in your quarters or with Lily." Reynard blinked a few times before shaking his head. "No, I can't sleep, and hate pacing in my room. As for the other thing, Lily and I have decided that we're ending it." "What happened?" Bastian asked, leaning forward. As though plagued by his thoughts, Reynard rested his head on his fingers and rubbed a temple. We had a long conversation about that. We thought we'd be more compatible in the beginning, but we were wrong. She wants someone who can relate to her passions more and isn't so extroverted. And after these past few months, I realized I needed someone who could face challenges at my side and not behind me. Maybe you need to try seeing someone new? I know Bastion stammered slightly as he spoke. A loud alarm blared on the bridge, and Reynard snarled a curse as he grabbed a hold of the controls. They had come dangerously close to hitting the top of a line of trees. He corrected the trajectory and performed a short-range scan to confirm no other possible obstructions nearby. I'm sorry, Bastion, what were you saying? Reynard continued once the danger had passed and the alarms had gone silent again. I was saying that... What happened? Akron bellowed as he barreled into the bridge and with a huffing Dravik in tow. Nothing, sir, Reynard exclaimed with a salute, which Bastion matched. I merely miscalculated the distance to some trees, and the proximity alarm went off. Akron groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose as he tried to fend off a headache. Where's Lauren? She's in her room. I relieved her for a break, to get some rest, Reynard replied. Akron studied his tactical officer. He noted the dark circles under his eyes, and the way his skin was even more pale. Despite his cheerful tone, Akron could see Reynard was hitting his limit on lack of sleep. I want you to get some rest as well, crewman, Akron ordered, seeing how Reynard's posture snapped to attention. Yes, sir. He conceded and obeyed the command. When it was just Bastion and the two senior crew members, Bastion coughed and took a few side steps toward the door. I'll just be heading out, too, he mumbled before disappearing into the hallway. The whole crew is going to need a long vacation after this, Akron remarked. Uh-huh, Drava commented absently and looked back to the datapad he had been showing Akron before the alarms had gone off. It's strange. We've been testing the water frequency with every system I can think of, and it just doesn't seem to do much. For the hydroponics bay, it increases the efficiency of the growing systems by 37%, but that's all. Let me take a look, Akron offered, sitting in the captain's chair as he read the statistics. He cast a glance at the unique screen that had been installed to the monitor to monitor the different frequencies, and sure enough, the water was barely a blip on the screen. Have you tried it in the kitchens? Maybe it'll be helpful with the food. Yes, that was the second thing we did. Blasted thing cooled the pipes so much that half of the refrigerators ruptured their tubing. Angel and I had a fun time fixing that up. Angel stood as an epiphany hit him. What if you routed it through the Nova Drive's cooling systems? Dravik scratched his chin as he mused. Yes. Intensive cooling properties can keep the Nova Drive in check when we're flying at high speeds. Might not do so much here, but once we're past that damn barrier, it could indirectly improve our efficiency. Akron gave the approval and handed the pad back to his head engineer. Taking the dismissal, Dravik trundled from the bridge to give this new theory a shot. Once alone on the bridge, Akron looked to the view screen and heaved a great sigh. Mist laced through the trees, obscuring the ground and making the world feel that much smaller. As the sun crept over the horizon, the night was forced back by unstoppable rays, turning the world a pale yellow. He routed the flight controls to his console and watched the brightening sky outside. It would be 2 days before they got to the star canopies, and with the ongoing plans to fight the Conclave, he knew they would go by swiftly. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 18. Yeah, I could see a second book being more focused on the crew. Just by the way things are looking, it feels like things on Durance will likely come mostly to a wrap in this first book. In which case, my guess would be their adventures will take place out further among the stars, so the crew will perforce be more in center stage. But I won't ask for confirmation or not. I really don't. I'm not fishing for spoilers here. That's just the way I see the trajectory of the storyline playing out. But that was a nice sort of slice of life chapter. Things were starting to return to normal. We see everyone dealing with the stress in their own ways. Some relationships getting stronger, some coming to an amicable end, and the dynamic between all the crew and their own coping mechanisms, because everyone deals with incredible stress in different ways. The decision to toss aside the neutrality laws was made, so the crew is well and goodly in the thick of it now, for better or for worse. So we'll see in our next sessions what sort of implications that has, but there's no backing out of it now. There's no getting around the fact that they're part of this war as much as anyone else. So at this point, they're looking to assemble a coalition against the Conclave and see whether they're able to hold together an alliance. Whether the Forerunner will be at the center of it or be a supporting force will yet to be seen. But I could very easily see Lark and, by extension, the Forerunner being the linchpin of any alliance that comes together. With any luck, they'll be able to pull all the remaining factions together, have a full all together for one sort of purpose alliance for change, which is kind of the goal all along. But whether or not that's actually going to be feasible, whether Sosario will partake or move past the corruption that had been spread throughout their upper echelons, will yet to be seen. So this was, aside from the high action of the kidnapping and the subsequent rescue, this session is a little bit more slower paced. It is good to have the author here to respond to my idle musings. But yeah, so this session was a little bit of a slower paced, which is nice. We get a different sort of understanding of the characters as we see their day-to-day lives under different stimuli, as they're working through the challenges and as they are coping with the stresses of an ever-changing environment. So the last couple of chapters were a nice little shift from that. But then also, looking back, we had the whole fracas at the beginning with the Ravagers collapsing and falling under new leadership. So I guess that wasn't all so peace and quiety as we let on, right? Anyway, it is a little after 10, so let's go ahead and call it here for the evening. Our next session is going to be on Friday, so we have a couple days to let it all simmer and beat around in our heads, and we'll be back this weekend for 3 days running. That'll get us, we usually get about 10 to 15% a night, so we might finish this weekend at the pace we're going. We're at about 66% right now through the book at chapter 19. So yeah, I think 3 sessions might get us to the end. Maybe next Tuesday we'll have a short one to finish up and do reflections, which are actually kind of nice. So we will call that a wrap tonight. As always, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We're having a lot of fun with this book. Thank you again to the author for joining us. There's a lot of reciprocality with this. You can get feedback for your book and enjoy the fact that we're enjoying it, and we get all that extra enjoyment from being able to bounce ideas off you. And I'm sure you can sit back and be smug and listen and think, they're way off base, but I won't let them know. I know I would be smug. But as always, please do check out the author's link tree. if you haven't yet. It is in the description for the stream. The video will be in the archive, so for anyone caring to join us later. Um, yeah, keeping the lip buttoned is always a challenge. Definitely one of the hardest parts about taking part in one of these sort of things. But by the end, we'll see how far off base we were, or if we called anything early. But let's go ahead and finish up here for the night, and I hope everyone will join us next time on Friday as we continue with Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. We'll be picking up from chapter 19 next time, and we're coming up toward the end. We're the last third, so as these things usually go, the story only accelerates and goes faster and harder as you get closer to the end. So we're probably in for an exciting weekend. I hope everyone has a wonderful time, wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks!